Welcome to the Weekend Spectator. My name is Grace Riley. I'm here with Paul Kengor, and it's been quite a week. Kamala Harris is still very out of touch along with her campaign, and we had Columbus Day this week, or as it's been changed, Indigenous Peoples Day, and Dr. Kengor wrote an excellent piece on this for the American Spectator. So we're going to hit on that and on the way that the left is trying to rewrite history, along with the many things that happened this week in the election between Brett Baier's disastrous interview with Kamala, disastrous for her, the Al Smith dinner and the speeches that happened there, the very out of touch video that Kamala Harris sent in place for her missing it. It's really been a wild week. Paul, it's great to be with you.
Great and gracious Grace. Good to be with you once again.
Yeah, let's start with the Columbus Day piece. So this was
Mhm.
earlier this week, but you're hitting a really important point with this. And it's something that I think the listeners probably are aware of, but people in my generation are becoming less and less aware of this.
Yeah, so the left has declared war on Christopher Columbus, right? This goes way back. They've been doing it since I was in college in the late 80s, early 1990s. In fact, I remember the 500th anniversary of Columbus, right? It would have been 1992. And back then he was being thrown on the ash heap of the liberals' history, right, as a DWEM, dead white European male. That was an acronym that they were using. By the way, Grace, they love dead white European males when it's like Karl Marx or Engels or the Frankfurt School or Herbert Marcuse. They even like dead white German males in that case,
Yeah.
right? But but if it's Columbus or Augustine or Aquinas or somebody like that, right?
And
That's
a quick shout out to Jason Edwards, who's a professor at Grove City College. And I
yeah,
was emailing him with him the other day, talking to him about just some of the things that he had taught in his history of education class
that's great.
and relating to Christianity, education, what the purpose of education is. And that is something that we focused on a lot, how the left has thrown the canon out the window and has
Mhm.
thrown just the things that were fundamentally agreed upon to be good for education, philosophy, all sorts of things like that. History, just thrown out the window because they don't like the dead white European males. And
Yeah, in fact, yeah, the mantra is "Hey, hey, ho, ho, Western Civ has got to go."
exactly.
Right? That was the Jesse Jackson chant. And while you were here at Grove City College, Grace, so your class of 2024, I mean, we brought back a Western Civ course as part of our core curriculum. Now, people might be surprised to know that we didn't have that to begin with, but actually, Grove City College had a 6 course civilization series core curriculum, so Western Civ was just saturated all through that, right? We didn't have to do a separate course, but we ended up creating more recently a specific Western Civ course.
Well,
So
after being
yeah,
in Grove City, I actually can't understand how it would be any other way. And obviously, most schools do
right.
not require stuff like that. But we had Western civilization, civilization literature, the arts, Christianity and civilization, and all of those things really were the staple that has helped me now as I've entered the real world and addressed politics and all sorts of things. That core has been significant, and I can't even imagine leaving that out, but that's what every school does nowadays.
Right. Even just to have a basic, workable understanding of art, literature, right? What words mean. And I mean, you'd at least want to be informed of that. At Stanford, they put this up to a vote with the student body, I think about 10 years ago, whether or not to have a Western Civ requirement, and it was voted down. It was voted down overwhelmingly. In fact, I wrote a piece for American Spectator on that a few years ago, and I gave the case of Indiana University of Bloomington, which was Bob Carroll and Vladi Plzezinski's college. In fact, that's where the American Spectator was founded in 1967. And these students were having a meltdown because there was this Dominican friar on campus, and this monk is walking around, and he's wearing white because that's what they wear, and he's carrying his rosary because they keep a rosary. And students started calling the campus security. There's a Klansman on campus, and he's carrying what was he's carrying a rope, right? It's unbelievable. It's crazy. And
That
so they're at the
maybe just
point.
maybe they shouldn't be deciding what classes they should and shouldn't be taking then. Maybe.
but and think about that. It shows What they're not being taught, which is about monks and the people. I mean, the Benedictines. I mean, it was the church that gave us the universities of all things, right? I mean, they saved and preserved a lot of, transcribed a lot of documents that could have been lost. They're not learning any of that, but they're learning about what? Race, 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 and race, right? Race, sex, gender, right? That's like their holy trinity. So
Do you
they
know what else?
mistake
Those
a
are just about,
Dominican for a Klansman.
yeah, those are also just about the simplest things that you don't need to learn about. I mean, talk about
Right.
the stating the obvious and spending years and years and hours on it. I mean, come on.
Unless you're redefining it, right?
Exactly.
If it's as simple as the birds and the bees and, male and female, he created them, right? That, that's pretty simple. But if you want to explain to people that there's really over 100 gender options, right? If you want to teach them about critical race theory and get them to pit themselves against one another in separate hostile camps of black versus white, well, that takes a little instruction. That takes a little, ideological indoctrination and brainwashing.
Yeah,
And so that's what the
dismantling
university.
reality takes some extra hours.
It does. It does. And so part of this, back to the original point, they've declared war on Christopher Columbus, and so they've tried to replace Columbus Day with something called Indigenous Peoples Day, and this is actually now being celebrated by the President of the United States, Joe Biden. Biden has issued proclamations, and their Indigenous Peoples Day comes on the same day of Columbus Day. So Columbus out, Indigenous people in. Yeah, ironically, not to digress too much, the first course that I took at Pitt as an undergrad, I'm a biochem biophysics major. That first semester, I had chemistry, physics, and the first course I had was a Western Civ course. And I used to walk to Shenley Park from the Frick Fine Arts Building, which is a beautiful building by the Cathedral of Learning. And I would sit under the statue of Columbus in Shenley Park and read these beautiful Western Civ texts that we were given to read. I wasn't really even thinking like, boy, how perfect! I'm under a statue of Columbus. But I thought of that not that long ago when, Pittsburgh city officials put a giant white blanket over top of the Columbus statue to ship it out. And I thought, well, how ironic is that? And a lot of Italian Americans have complained about this because Columbus is their hero, right? He's from Genoa, Italy. But they've replaced them with Indigenous Peoples Day. So I've started writing for Spectator now each year, and last year was the first, an Indigenous Peoples Day piece. And last year, it was titled something like, Native Americans, Indigenous Peoples who owned and whipped Black Americans. And I know that topic really well because I did a book on the church and slavery called The Worst of Indignities. And I have chapters in there on slavery. By the way, the worst slavers in history were the Muslims. It's always been that way. But I have a very uncomfortable chapter in there, all right, for the politically correct and woke among you about the fact that the five so-called civilized tribes, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Creek, the Seminole, the Chickasaw, they all had slaves. They had Black African slaves here in America. And a bunch of them fought for the Confederacy in the Civil War. They continued to own slaves even after the Emancipation Proclamation, which they were against. And to this day, Grace, there are Black Americans that have lawsuits against those five civilized tribes seeking reparations and redress for what happened to their ancestors by these brutal Indian slave masters. So that was the piece that I wrote last year. So this year, I focused for Indigenous Peoples Day on Chief Stand Watie, also known, people will say Stan Watie, but it's spelled like Watie, but some people pronounce it Watie. But he was Cherokee, leader, Indian leader. He was a Confederate general. He was the last Confederate general to surrender. Not Robert E. Lee, not Stonewall Jackson. The guy holding it up was Stan Watie, this Cherokee who owned slaves his entire life, rejected the Emancipation Proclamation, was ruthless. I mean, everybody feared this guy. All right. So my point is, you want to replace Columbus with Indigenous peoples, all right, you better have a proper understanding of who these people were. And I'm not even talking about how they went to war with each other, how they enslaved one another. cannibalism that took place, especially among like the Aztecs and the human sacrifice and all unbelievable stuff. I'm talking strictly on the subject of what we lay at the feet of Columbus, slavery, right? Black African slavery. In fact, they weren't even black slaves weren't even brought to America yet. When were they brought to America? 1619 project, right? Do your math, liberals, right? A lot earlier than that. But your indigenous people's heroes, all right, they're pretty flawed too. You want to know what's guilty here? Sin and evil, kind of the human condition, right?
Mhm. Yeah, well, and that's the problem too with deciding that looking at these people in historical context and looking at so Columbus obviously when I learned about Columbus in school it was historic. It was we were learning about him coming to the United States. We were learning all of that. And it wasn't this big political thing, but nowadays, I mean, talk about ignoring inconvenient truths
You
because
weren't in
we
a public
never
school,
hear
were
that.
you? You were
I
you
was
were
in a public school a little bit, but it definitely when I was in public school, it was going downhill a little bit, but not near it's significantly worse now, even than it
yeah,
was when I was there. There were
yeah,
plenty of problems with bias when I was in public school, and I also went to a private school, which was similarly as bad in that regard. But just in the past few years, it has gotten so much worse. You can't even comprehend how it
yeah,
happened so quickly, too. But yeah, I mean, it's so important that we look at history in all of its context and also that we're okay with doing that. I mean, people aren't even okay considering the possibility that their narrative is false. And I say narrative purposefully because it's true that the left has created this into a good versus evil thing, and it's not black and white like that, as you've just explained.
right, right.
Not at all. So, I mean, hopefully they'd look into that. But before we were talking too about the ways that obviously the secular left misunderstands faith. And what a better example than looking at what Kamala Harris did this week, the
Mm,
video that she sent in to the Al Smith dinner that she historically did not attend this past week. She sent in this video, and in it, of course, is a mockery of Catholics and the faith, which she thought was supposed to be funny.
yeah,
Really was not funny at all, though. It just wasn't. I'm, I mean, objectively, it was not funny. It was kind of, and especially the context that she sent it in. Not only did she not go to the dinner, and speak like a normal person, but she took plenty of time to do this whole skit this
yeah.
SNL style skit with other actors. So she had the time. I don't really know why she didn't attend actually if she had the time to make this really out of touch skit that I don't know who on her campaign staff approved or thought was a good idea or thought would resonate with voters in a positive way.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry. Hey, what's going on? Who was that?
Oh, sorry, Mary Catherine Gallagher. Mary Catherine Gallagher. It's so nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you, Mary Catherine. Right now I'm trying to record my speech for tonight's dinner.
Oh, yeah, I know. I just want to say that I'm Catholic, and tonight is one of the biggest dinners next to the Last Supper.
It is a very important dinner, and it's an important tradition that I'm so proud to be a part of.
Sometimes when I get nervous.
yeah. Bill Donahue of the Catholic League, who's just tremendous, a brilliant guy, and he wrote a piece for us on this at the American Spectator. The fact that she decided not to go to the Al Smith dinner, Grace, is stunning. It's really an amazing thing. I mean, that dinner's been going on for, I mean, 60, 70 years. I'd have to do the math and think about that. But it's an annual dinner, kind of white tie event. Everybody, all the high profile media people in New York go there. Anybody who's a high profile media figure who's Catholic is definitely there, whether they're liberal Catholic, conservative Catholic. By the way, you shouldn't be a liberal Catholic. I give, but anyway, they're all there. A lot of Jewish people go there. Chuck Schumer was right next to Donald Trump the whole time he spoke there. So the Archbishop of New York, always runs it. That's Cardinal Dolan, who's a great guy, great sense of humor, kind of big, jolly guy. I've met him a number of times, and so it's this fun occasion where the two sides. So every 4 years they invite the two major party nominees and they roast each other. And it's funny. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton both did it together
It
in
was funny
2016.
when they did it. It was great.
Yeah, and people, if you want to see the only picture of Trump and Hillary side by side, both laughing, that's it. It's from the Al Smith dinner. in 2016. So everybody always goes. And this year, Kamala Harris didn't go. And we have known this in advance by a few months. So the reason she ends up sending in a video was because to try to do some cleanup, because she realized the fact that she wasn't going in itself was such an egregious, outrageous mistake. So she didn't go. She instead sends in this skit that she did with a former Saturday Night Live actress who plays, I think, like sister, not sister, but like a Catholic schoolgirl, Mary Catherine or something like that. And it's not funny. It wasn't funny at all. It ended up almost looking like they're mocking Catholics, right? You're supposed to roast your opponent, which would be Donald Trump.
Yeah, somehow
And Trump
I'm
gave up,
worse in Catholics. Maybe that
yeah.
Freudian
Well,
slip.
well, and Trump gave really funny remarks. By the way, I don't know if you watched it. I watched all 28 minutes of it. The best line of the night from Trump, he said, Vice President Harris couldn't be here. I understand she's in Michigan receiving communion from Gretchen Whitmer. Which
That's why
because
the left has had a week with making fun of the faith, really.
yeah, because Gretchen Whitmer is placing a Dorito on the mouth of this podcaster, this feminist Liz Plank, I think. I never heard of her before
It's
that.
extremely inappropriate, insulting, and out of touch.
It's so weird too. And so this Liz, she's kind of on her knees, right? And so Whitmer's like laying the Dorito on her tongue, clearly like she's kneeling to receive communion. And then Liz takes it, she's like, oh, kind of like savoring it. And then Whitmer turns and gives a stupid blank look at the camera. And Whitmer tried to explain it away. Of course, obviously a mocking of receiving communion. I mean, she's claiming it's something else, but you would never do it with the supplicant or whoever kneeling like that, or at the very least, they're doing it in some way to imitate or invoke or disrespect communion. And they're both so clearly. So for Trump to say Kamala isn't here, I understand she's in Michigan receiving communion from Gretchen Whitmer to the Catholic audience. They cracked up. Everybody thought that was really
Sure.
funny.
Well,
But it shows what a good sport Trump is. And with Kamala, the fact that she wouldn't go, you got to ask yourself why. And a lot of Catholics are saying, and Dolan even said that he was, quote, upset. And Dolan never says this about anybody. But it must be that one, or at least it appears this way, that one, she can't laugh at herself and even have fun in a good-natured way with her opponent. And two, that confirms what a lot of people think, that she has this disdain for Catholics. And when you read some of her comments about the Knights of Columbus and others, her hideous views, fanaticism on abortion, you wouldn't be unjustified thinking that. And then she skips the Al Smith dinner.
I think
Just
the
a huge mistake by her.
third option is that her campaign has just sounded the gavel on the fact that she cannot laugh because it'll only hurt her. So maybe she just knew that one could hear her laugh. So
Right.
make
Yeah,
everything
that's
worse. As if her entire week of campaigning this week didn't already make everything worse, because she also went on Fox News with Brett Baier, and it was a complete disaster for her. It was actually insane. Some people have called him rude. Absolutely not. He was doing his job. He was asking her questions that no one has asked her this entire time. This is the first time that she's had a somewhat adversarial interview. Now, Trump does hostile interviews all the time, and it's
yeah.
totally fine. But this is the first time, maybe ever in her entire career, that she sat down and had someone question her in a legitimate way and push back. This whole campaign, she's done interviews where hosts have not followed up on anything she's said, even though she's been lying in approvable ways. So finally, Brett Baier follows up on some things, tries to get a real answer out of her, and she just filibusters the whole time, doesn't answer questions, gets mad, gets emotional, loses her
Yeah.
temper. I mean, this
Right.
whole interview, it's worth going and watching the whole thing. It really speaks for itself. And at one point, it ended up that her campaign staff, after she'd already showed up late and it was already going to be a short interview, started, according to Brett Baier, waving their hands for
Yeah.
campaign staffers, cutting the
Stop.
interview because it was going
Stop.
so poorly.
Yeah, yeah, and by the way, you got to ask yourself, right? So for a while, of course, she wasn't doing any interviews. Now she is, and she's even willing to do an interview with Fox News. Why? Because she's declining in the polls, and she, in fact, as we're talking right now, this morning I looked at Real Clear Politics. Trump is actually up in 7 out of 7 of the top swing states, 7 out of 7, and her lead, which was over 2 points a few days ago, is now closer to 1.5. I mean, her lead can be 3 overall in the polls, and that'll be enough for Trump to win. She could be up in all the swing states by 1 or 2. Hillary at this point was up by like 6 or 7. Biden more than that. And Trump could win those swing states. If he's up in all 7 of those swing states right now, she's done. She's toast. So that's why she's interviews. And our Dan Flynn pointed this out in his piece this week. You know who should be angry? She and her staff at themselves, because they did not prep her at all. And they've given her softball questions from sycophants, like, speaking of Catholic, Stephen Colbert, right? And she ought to be able to expect a question like this one from Brett Baier. Tell us about, do you still support gender transition surgery for prison inmates?
Are
right?
you still in support of using taxpayer dollars to help prison inmates or detained illegal aliens to transition to another gender?
I will follow the law, and it's a law that Donald Trump actually followed. You're probably familiar with, now it's a public report, that under Donald Trump's administration, these surgeries were available on a medical necessity basis to people in the federal prison system. And I think, frankly, that ad from the Trump campaign is a little bit of like throwing, stones when you're living in a glass house.
The Trump aides say that he never advocated for that prison policy and no gender transition surgeries
you know what, you got to take responsible for what happened in your administration.
Yeah, no surgeries happened in his presidency.
It's in black and white.
Would you still advocate for using taxpayer dollars for gender reassessment surgeries?
I will follow the law, just as I think Donald Trump would say he did.
You would have a say as president.
Like I said, I think he spent $20 million on those ads, trying to create a sense of fear in the voters.
Right. And she immediately goes into, well, Donald Trump, I will follow the rule of the law, and then proceeds to ask us if Donald Trump supports gender transition, which is maddening in of itself. It's like, no, wait a second. You supported this.
And you're the
This
one
is like,
this. You said that you put that into law in California too and bragged
right.
about it.
Attorney General.
So that's
I learned that the California Department of Corrections, which was a client of mine, I didn't get to choose my clients.
Right. A client of the Attorney General.
A client of the Attorney General,
Right.
of the Office of Attorney General, that they were standing in the way of surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. And there was a specific case. And when I learned about the case, I worked behind the scenes to not only make sure that that transgender woman got the services she was deserving. So it wasn't only about that case. I made sure that they changed the policy in the state of California so that every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access to the medical care that they desired and need. And I believe it was not only, I know it was historic in California, but I believe actually it may have been one of the first, if not the first in the country, where I pushed for that policy in a Department of Correction.
So that's why you're being asked this question, not Donald Trump, because you are the one who has bragged about making policy like that.
Right. Yeah, this is like core to the modern liberalism, progressivism, and the Democrats, LGBTQ stuff. So defend it. I mean, you're all about this stuff, right? By the way, are you trying to tell us now that Donald Trump's not anti-LGBTQ? Are you saying Trump is like pro-transgenderism? That's what you are, and you're proud of it. So school Brett Baier here and tell him why he should support this and why Trump is a fascist or Hitler or Nazi or wants to destroy democracy or whatever. because he's against it. This really bothers me, Grace. Why don't they defend their ideas? If you ask Donald Trump that question, it'll be like, "Oh yeah, there's no way that's insanity that people should be getting those surgeries." And I don't even know if Brett Baier asked her, but he was short on time. He could have asked her, "What about? Do you think that biological males who identify as female should be able to compete in sports with women in college sports?" Right? What would she have done there? The answer should have been, "Yes, I do. Of course I do. I think that's great. I've been saying it for 6 years." What would she have done? "I will follow the rule of law." And Donald Trump supports that. What would she have done there? They can't even defend their own ideas.
And what does that say? I mean, what does that say that they're unwilling to admit what they really want to do or think?
Right.
Not only will they not, can she, I don't think
They
she's
can't they can't
capable.
get elected with those ideas. That's
Right.
what it says.
And that's the thing. I don't think she's capable of defending her ideas because we've seen that time and time again. But on top of that, she's not willing and has definitely been told not to make statements on these things because it will only hurt her. So, with that being said, how awful is that we have someone running for president of the United States who is so insidious and dishonest in everything that she is trying to do, and then has the audacity to go on X and tweet out things like, "I've had a plan this whole time. We know Donald Trump is is a liar and no one knows what he's going to do in office," trying to pretend essentially that she's the honest, forward-facing candidate who has had clear policy plans the entire time. We've talked about this on the show many times. She didn't have any policy plans for a very long time, and even so now she will not answer any questions that she's asked about them. Throughout this entire interview, I don't know if we heard a single straightforward answer to a question Brett Baier asked. He asked about the border as well. A lot of things that voters want to know about, things that she should want to talk about to kind of change the narrative that's surrounding her. Because right now, for example, obviously the talk about the border in her is all negative. No one thinks that she's done a good job on that. And she could have used not that it would have been legitimate or anything, but she could have used this as an opportunity to express something of substance about what she's going to do, how she's going to fix a problem that Americans are concerned about. But obviously, we know she's not going to do those things, which is why she couldn't say anything she was going to do. But I mean, to completely ignore questions and just talk in a circle and use about a million words to say nothing is
How
crazy.
about
Of illegal immigrants from more than 150 countries. How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but
right
do you,
now,
just a
which
number.
is-
Do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Brett, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your
And-
Homeland Security Secretary said that
Well, no,
85%
I'm
of
not
apprehensions.
Finished. I'm not finished. We have
It's a
an
rough
immigration
estimate of
system
6 million people
that
have been
needs to be-
released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get to the question, I promise you.
I was beginning to answer.
And when you came into office, your administration immediately reversed a number of Trump border policies. Most significantly, the policy that required illegal immigrants to be detained through deportation, either in the U.S. or in Mexico. And you switched that policy. They were released from custody awaiting trial. Instead, included in those were a large number of single men, adult men, who went on to commit heinous crimes. So, looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
At the beginning of our administration, within practically hours of taking the oath, the first bill that we offered Congress, before we worked on infrastructure, before the Inflation Reduction Act, before the Chips and Science Act, before the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the... Yes, ma'am.
May I finish responding, please?
But
you have to let me finish,
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate,
I'm
and they
in the
didn't bring
middle
up
of
that bill.
responding to the point you're raising,
Okay.
and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
We recognized from day one that, to the point of this being your first question, it is a priority for us as a nation and for the American people. And our focus has been on fixing a problem.
How about the question from Baier about when did you first notice some of the decline in mental faculties with Biden, which is a great question. And that's why she's nominated. It's why she's nominated, right? She didn't win a single delegate. And her staff, again, you parade your candidate to sycophants on The View and Stephen Colbert and so forth. If you would give her real questioning, she could have an answer ready for something like that. And it could be something like, I know, Brett, I know this will seem like a dodge, but yeah, I feel like I shouldn't talk about that. But it's obvious that the president has struggled, with his faculties. I'm now the nominee. It's something
gaslighting
prepared to say. Yeah.
Call Donald Trump. He's misguided. You say now
he's unstable. He is unstable, Brett.
He's not well. You say he's mentally not stable.
He's not stable.
Let me ask you this. You told many interviewers that Joe Biden was on his game, that ran around circles on his staff. When did you first notice that President Biden's mental faculties appeared diminished?
Joe Biden, I have watched from the Oval Office to the Situation Room. And he has the judgment and the experience to do exactly what he has done in making very important decisions on behalf of the American people.
There were no concerns raised?
Brett, Joe Biden is not on the ballot.
I understand.
And Donald Trump
But
is,
you talked about it.
And Donald Trump
After George Clooney said within a few minutes of talking to President Biden at a fundraiser that he thought this was not the same Joe Biden that we saw on the debate stage.
Donald Trump is on the ballot.
She just gaslights everyone, is extremely offended that he would even ask that. And it's not like she acts like it's up in the air that his faculties are a problem. She acts like it's up in the air that, it's just Republicans saying that Biden's health is declining.
Right.
That's not true.
I can tell you, I've been with the president. He's wise. And now, come on. Everybody knows that's nonsense.
BS.
That's
Everyone
bunkum.
knows that.
That's exactly right.
People on the left know that. It is common knowledge. That's right. I mean, it's the simple logic of he was running and she was saying, literally,
that's why she's there.
Before he dropped out of the race, she's saying Biden is in great health and he's going to be the perfect candidate.
Right.
And then a week later, all of a sudden, with no explanation, Biden did not speak on him dropping out of the race. He never officially spoke on it, actually, or answered any questions. But when it happened, it took at least a week or two for any sort of something statement other than the letter that was published to his Twitter account of him leaving the race. So it was very, very sketchy, we could say, the entire time. By
the way, there's a good Saturday Night Live skit that somebody sent me about after the VP debate, and it's Kamala played by a Black actress on Saturday Night Live who's really good. I mean, she just nails the voice perfectly. And they're watching the VP debate. Yeah, and they brought Dana Carvey back to play Joe Biden, right? And Dana Carvey walks in and he says something like, the vice president's not here. but you could, even Saturday Night Live, the liberals watching that skit are laughing. Everybody, Dana Carvey does this like, catatonic like stare. Everybody's laughing because everybody knows that was his condition, and she can't even answer a question about it.
No, she won't answer a question. She acts like it's conspiracy, which it is totally not. I mean, that's just ridiculous. And
she had a really bad week. It's going to be interesting to see next week what happens to her in the polls from this. So she continues to go down. I think it's 1.5 overall. She's up now in the Real Clear Politics thing that I looked this morning. It'd be interesting to see if she goes below 1 next week. She's getting really desperate here in Pennsylvania. Something else that was really funny, and this is written about by our Lou Aguilar in American Spectator this week. The ad that they did on Real Men for Kamala Harris or something like that. And that is one of the most ridiculous political ads I've ever seen. And again, it shows how out of touch these liberal woke leftists are on her campaign, because they had to hire actors to pretend to play real men. And it's obvious when you're watching this, right, that these are actors. The only one in the whole group, the black guy who's weightlifting, all right, he looks like he's not an actor. He looks legit. But the other guys, I mean, if you go all over X everywhere else, it says it looks like it's gay guys trying to play
Pretty much.
non-gay guys, right? But I don't know if that's true. They're
Doesn't
clearly
look like that
actors.
though.
I mean, in fact, Lou Aguilar talks about that and details it and notes who the guy is. I think it's a Jimmy Kimmel writer, who might have written that script. You want an idea of what it's really like being a bunch of guys in the campaign. Come to my house on a Sunday afternoon when we're over there, me and my sons and other guys watching a Steeler game. All right, eating the kind of food that guys eat, right? Having some beers, having an Iron City beer, Straub, which is brewed up here in St. Mary's, whatever. And we're watching the game, and then on comes for the 20th time in 2.5 hours, the same ad from Kamala Harris about, guess what? Abortion, abortion, abortion. And sometimes they're Bob Casey ads as well. Or because we're almost in Ohio, there's Sherrod Brown ads, abortion, abortion, abortion. And it's got some woman who's, by the way, who's not an actress, all right, who looks like she's a female doctor, gynecologist, looks like she runs a Planned Parenthood clinic, berating us about how Dave McCormick or Marino or Vance and Trump are going to take away choice. And we're ready to throw the football through the TV set. It's like, leave us alone with this. All right. I'll go over to Primanti's and watch the game over here, and they're just browbeating us with abortion, abortion, abortion. You want to know why you're losing among men? Real men? That's part of it.
Yeah, no, exactly. Exactly. No one's fooled by it either. Everyone can see through just the, again, complete out of touchness of all this.
Yes.
It's out of touch. It's disingenuous. People can tell. And it'll be very interesting to watch what continues to unfold. We're less than 20 days out from this election. I'm very excited for this to be behind us and hoping for the best. But we'll be watching in the next week. And we'll see you next week on The Weekend Spectator. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode where we were able to jump through quite a few topics. Make sure that you check out the pieces that we mentioned throughout the episode. Go to spectator.org for more, as always, and share this with your friends. Like it, boost it. Anything you can do always helps. It was so great to be with you this weekend.
Grazie, Grace, and we will see you all again next week.